good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. I'm in California, so it's 9 a.m. here. If you're on the East Coast, it's noon, so it's afternoon. So good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited. My name is Andrea Sherpick, and I am a SpouseLink ambassador here at Camp Pendleton. I'm a Marine Corps spouse and have been for 14 years. And I'm super excited today to talk about preparing for deployment, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. But before we do, we're just going to, just a little couple housekeeping things. Please use the comment box to let us know where you're joining from. Are you near a military installation? Do you live near a INI station? Are you living out in town? Just let us know where you're at. What branch of service do you represent? As I said, I'm a Marine Corps spouse and represent the Marine Corps. I love them. And the last thing is, do you have any questions regarding deployment that you'd like us to talk about? Is there anything that you'd like to know about deployment? Between our guests and myself, I think we can probably answer a lot of your questions. We've both been through multiple deployments. So we'd love to hear from anyone who is joining us. So let's go ahead and bring in our guest for the day. Good morning. Today, our guest is Lizann Lightfoot, a Marine Corps wife, a mom of 5 kids, the voice of the Seasoned Spouse blog, and the author of the book, Open Win, Letters of Encouragement for Military Spouses. Lizann, let's jump straight in. Can you tell us a little bit about your backstory?
Sure. And first, thank you so much for having me on today and giving me the opportunity to talk about deployments, which is always a very special place in my heart. But essentially, I am a girl who fell in love with a boy. He decided to join the Marine Corps, and I was in college at the time. So we dated for a very long time. I mentioned that 29 Palms was involved in really delaying our marriage for several years because I refused to move out there to be with him. But we did eventually get married. We've been married 15 years now. And along that journey, partially because of having kids and needing to stay home with them, and partially because of being at really inconvenient duty stations where I couldn't work, and partially because of needing to work from home, I started writing. And first it was just a casual, fun blog to share my adventures with my family while we were stationed overseas, and everyone wanted to know what it was like to live in Spain. So I wrote and published a book while I was there. And eventually when we moved to California, I started up my own freelance writing business, the Seasoned Spouse blog, and it's been about 6 years now. And I'm just so excited to be part of this community and to support our fellow military families.
So if you have not checked out Lizann's blog, it's really fun. It's really informative. I consider myself a seasoned spouse as well, and I still got some tidbits out of it that I didn't necessarily think about before. So if you haven't checked out her blog, I highly recommend it. It's a quick, easy read. There's nothing too complicated about it, but it's definitely informative, definitely fun, and relevant to any spouse. Lizann's kids, I think, are quite a bit younger than mine, but I still got snippets from the, how to help your kids through the deployment blog that she recently wrote. Hers focused more on younger kids, but I still could take some of those ideas and apply them to my kids who are teenagers and almost off to college. So if you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend it. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. And I clicked follow on it, so I will be following it and reading it from now on. I love it when military spouses can, learn from each other, and also when they can support each other. So definitely check it out. So talking about deployment, there's so much we can talk about when it comes to deployment. But to set the stage, why don't you share your family's experiences with deployments and why this topic is so close to your heart?
Yeah, it is tricky to decide where to start. And I guess I'll just say that in summary, we had 7 deployments over the course of his career. And so for the first 3 of those, we were not married yet. I was the girlfriend. I was in college and back home doing my thing. He was deployed to Iraq 3 times in a row. And the reason those were so formative to me is because I was so disconnected from the military community. This was at the very beginning of the Iraq War, when families were still trying to figure out what it meant to be in combat again after years of what we've called the peacetime military. And so no one knew what to expect, what was happening. And I was completely cut off from any of those family communications because I was not a family member. And I didn't live near his base. So I didn't have any connection to other Marine Corps spouses, to anyone else who was going through a similar experience. And because of that, I've always felt the need to reach out to other girlfriends and boyfriends and fiancés and make people feel connected to this community, because the emotions are the same, the fear and the worry and the doubt, it's all the same, whether or not you're married. And because of that experience, supporting people through deployment has always been really important to me. But then we did get married, and he's done 4 deployments during our marriage. And for the first 2, I was just overwhelmed with babies, to be honest. I had child number 2 was born 2 weeks before a deployment, and child number 3 was born during a deployment. He was my hurricane baby, born in the middle of a hurricane while my husband was in Afghanistan. And I share that story in my book.
Perfect. I think we can all acknowledge that that's the way that it goes. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. That's the mantra of the military spouse when their spouse is deployed or their loved one. It doesn't have, like you said, you don't have to be married to someone to love them and care about them and be worried about them. We have a different story that we were married for 6 years before my husband joined the Marine Corps. So for all of his deployments, we had kids. Like my son was 6 months old when my husband left on his first. My other son was 5. So I was dealing with a kindergartner and pretty much a newborn. And so, it doesn't matter really the stage you're at in your life. A deployment is always going to be a hard and emotional thing. So, I think that you hit it on the head when you said you don't have to be married to someone for it to be hard and scary and all those things. I love that you put such an emphasis on all people who are connected to military members and not just a spouse. Although spouses are super important and we love them and we care about them, of course. But at the same time, I don't think that we should discredit somebody, who's been dating their spouse for 10 years or their service member for 10 years and they leave. It's not going to be any easier for them.
For sure. And I think that's what I started to realize from those later deployments, was just the necessity of having that support system.
Yeah.
That when he went to Afghanistan for the second time, I had a 3-year-old who was just starting preschool. I had an 18-month-old, and then I had the baby near the beginning of that deployment. So ages 3 and under was absolutely overwhelming. And I could not do it by myself. And my family was not super nearby. So they did come and help me out quite a bit. But I learned that you just needed to have a local support system. You needed to have people that you could turn to for just physical needs of taking care of kids and getting everyone fed, but also emotional needs and your general well-being and all of that. And it wasn't until his 6th and 7th deployments. Sorry, what?
That's when you really build those communities of people, and those become your family where you're at. And that's so important. And I would say that's a lot of what we do at SpouseLink, is making sure that we encourage young spouses specifically to get out and build those kind of community, so that when their service member is deployed, they have a network to help them through. It's invaluable. There's nothing like the military community, especially when your loved one is deployed.
And it's so necessary.
Yeah.
So by the time we got to his 6th and 7th deployments, he finally had some non-combat deployments. So for me, that was exciting and almost relaxing to prepare for something that wasn't combat for once. And at that point, we had been at 4 different duty stations, and it was our 6th and 7th deployment. So people started coming to me and asking, this is their first deployment, and they're trying to figure out, how do I prepare? What do I do with a baby? What do I do with a toddler? And it started to sink in that I had developed strategies, I had developed coping mechanisms over the years, and that those things don't happen automatically. So I wanted to share what I had learned and what was working for me, so that I could help these other families who were going through their first or second deployment. And what started out as just responding to people's Facebook posts on the spouse page turned into a blog and eventually became a book.
I love it. It's so great to see someone take something practical and just turn it into something that's such a service to other people. So when your loved one, your service member is getting ready to deploy, what are some considerations that you need to make on the home front when you're getting ready for that? What are some things you do ahead of a deployment to make sure that you're ready when they get on that white bus?
I always view it a little bit like that nesting stage before you have a baby. And if anyone has been there before, you know that you just kind of have this need to get things in order
Yeah.
because you know that the baby is coming, life is going to be chaotic, you're not going to be sleeping well, everything's going to be kind of put off and behind. And so it can get down to really nitty gritty details. You just want everything to be clean. You want the closets to be organized. You want to make sure that you're well stocked on food. And I think we apply that same approach to wanting to control some of the smaller elements in our lives as we're getting ready for a deployment. We know that the deployment is just this enormous thing that we can't control. As a spouse, I have zero power over anything that his unit does, over anything that my service member does. And to compensate for that lack of control, I find ways that I can control my own household, my own relationships, my own routines. And I learn to rely on those things as something that's steady and predictable and something that I can have control over in my life. So for me, preparing for deployment is all about building those support systems. And it has to be done in advance, which is very frustrating because I know when you're getting ready for your service member to leave, you want to spend as much time as possible with them. You don't want to be going out and like meeting new people and trying to make new friends. You want to spend all your time with your service member, which is great, except that the day that they leave, you're going to be like all the other spouses in the unit going, oh man, who needs a friend? Who's available to hang out and do something? So I found that I had to be very proactive in the months or even the year leading up to a deployment, where I was like aggressively asking people for their phone numbers when we had just met, because at some point I can't just be chatty friends with the other mom from preschool or casual friends that waves to my neighbor. I need to actually have their phone number. So when I get locked out of my house or when I'm sick and I can't pick up my kid from preschool, that I have some other human being that I can call that can help me out.
Absolutely. We had my husband's first deployment. My son was 6 months old and he got really, really sick, like deathly sick. And I had a kindergartner at the time. And thank the good Lord for my community, for my friends, for my support, for my deployment buddies who, before the deployment came up, we had said, like, we're there for each other. If you need me, call me at 2 a.m. And I called friends late at night, early in the morning. I built this system of people that when I had to take my son to the doctor or to the hospital or whatever it was, I knew my other son was picked up from school. I knew he was at a friend's house having a play date and he was fine. And it's things like that that you don't necessarily think about until it happens. And so it's so important to build that system up ahead of time. And it almost sounds callous, like, oh, make friends with people for your deployments. But that's not what it is at all. It's make connections so that if they need you or you need them, it's not a one-way street. Because sure. I would say that I have friends who have called me and said, I have an emergency. Can you pick up my kids? And I would drop whatever I'm doing to be there for them equally as much as they would for me. And I will say there's nothing like that in the world aside from the community that I've seen in the military and among the spouses who, I've met through deployments or through living on a base or being part of a organization on base or through SpouseLink or through volunteer programs I've done with military spouses. I don't know that there's another group of people who understand exactly what we're going through and what it means to really be that deployment buddy, that person that's there for you no matter what.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so important, to have those people that you can lean on when you need them. And like you said, it's reciprocal. They're going to lean right back on you. And that's absolutely part of the value of this community and the strength of those friendships.
Yeah. So it can be super overwhelming. How do you recommend, what do you do before? How do you start getting ready before? How does your family start getting ready when you're approaching a deployment? What do you do?
I hesitate to use the word lucky, but I guess in the comparison of military deployments, my husband generally knew months ahead of time when he was going to deploy. So we haven't had to deal with too many of the rapid, unexpected deployments. And I know that can be a whole different challenge. But in our case, I did typically have the benefit of time to start mapping out. And I am someone who loves lists. My husband makes fun of me for all of my lists, but I'm sure there is someone watching and someone else in our audience who is a big list maker too. And you have the list apps in your phone and you love to-do lists because you get to cross things off. So for me, it always starts like that's how I organize my thoughts and my emotions, and everything is sort of making these lists of priorities of what's the paperwork that has to get done that only he can do. So I need to make sure that his signature is on it before he leaves. You know, what are the things that have to get done around the house that I could do on my own. I can maintain my house and I can take care of my car, but it is absolutely easier to do it when there's two adults in the household rather than just the one. So I try to catch up on some of that housing maintenance and car maintenance and make sure that things are kind of good to go for the deployment. And a lot of it is planning for the worst. We talked about having that support network and having someone to lean on. And I found that a lot of my stress leading up to deployment was the uncertainty that I did not know what would happen if I got sick or if I got in a car accident. You know, my family lives on the other side of the country. Who is going to take care of my kids if something, God forbid, happens to me while my husband's on the other side of the world? And that is a huge mental stress and burden to carry around with you. And somehow it wasn't until his 6th deployment that I learned that there's a family care plan. So hopefully your unit is walking you through that paperwork, but a family care plan is official paperwork that you turn into the military unit, designating a local person. It can be a neighbor, it could be a friend, it could be anyone that you trust locally who would take care of your kids in the event of an accident. And so if you end up in the hospital or the police are involved or whatever happens to you, they're going to contact the military unit, and the military unit has phone numbers listed on file for who's going to pick up the kids from school and who's going to take care of them for those first few days until the grandparents can arrive. So for me, just sorting through those worst case scenarios, once I faced that fear and was able to process it and make a plan for it and talk to the people and say, hey, just so you know, you're going to be my go-to person to pick up the kids. And they said, sure, I can do that. It took all that weight off my shoulders, and it just gave me so much more peace and confidence facing deployment. And that's what really led to me creating my ultimate deployment guide, which is, it's a checklist that's available on my blog, but it's also a pre-printed book that you can get on Amazon. And it's just a collection of checklists and things to do and important paperwork and all those things that when they're floating around in your head, they feel stressful and confusing and, you know, keeping you from sleeping at night. And once you've gotten them gathered into one place and you've taken the time to write them down and to answer those questions, you're going to feel like, okay, I've done what I can. I'm ready now. So I love being able to share that confidence with people.
I love that so much. Now I'm going to start buying that for people who are facing a deployment. What a great tool. If you're giving someone a gift, to just stick that in with it so that they have a checklist, especially a new spouse who's not done it before. And interesting that you said that about the family care plan, because also we never saw a family care plan until like maybe deployment 3 or 4. So maybe they didn't exist.
Maybe new. I don't know, but it was.
But it's amazing.
A piece of paper can be life changing, but it really opened up my eyes to a way to approach stressful situations.
A note on that is, if you put someone on your family care plan, also put them on your kids' pickup list at school. Because if you don't, then the school's still not going to let them take them home. So just that has happened to a friend of mine before, where she had her one person on her family care plan, another person on their pickup, and the school wouldn't let them pick up her kids. So make sure you do that. What a great tool though to have, just easily printable or buyable on Amazon. I mean, I buy everything on Amazon, so click.
That's why I put it up there, that I know some people prefer to get it and just print it out from the website. But if you don't feel like dealing with a printer and you want to get a nice pre-bound, you know, color-coded pages, then there it is on Amazon.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, like just before this, I was printing something and I showed Lizann. I had actually printed like 5 pages on like shipping labels, because I forgot that I had shipping labels in my printer. So if I can buy something already printed, I'm much happier than having to use my printer, which I hadn't used in a while because the shipping labels were from 2 weeks ago. So I obviously don't print very often.
I do see we have a question from Callie
Oh, okay.
on Facebook. She said, I'm about to give birth by myself while my husband's on our first deployment together. Should we be getting a care plan still? That's definitely a question to ask your unit. I'm not sure if you can make one before your baby's born, because maybe perhaps your baby doesn't have a name yet. So I don't know what it would take to actually file that, but I would definitely look into it, because taking care of a baby by yourself is definitely stressful. And you want to know that there's at least one other legal trusted adult that could be available to step in should anything unforeseen happen to you. So I would encourage you to talk to the unit and hopefully get one filled out anyway.
Yeah. And if you can't do a family care plan, definitely some other sort of document that's through your husband's unit or through base legal that just gives some sort of guidance on what to do in an emergency if anything were needed for you or the baby or your husband. Just cover all your bases. And if you have a DRC at your unit, that's a great person to contact. Or if you don't have a DRC, then a URC or
FRG, all those things.
Any of those things, yeah. Depending on your branch and what your husband's battalion or unit has. So definitely check out all those resources, and they'll probably be good guidance for you. So speaking of planning ahead before the deployment, what are some practices or mistakes to avoid when you're preparing for deployment?
I think the biggest is don't wait until your service member leaves to start looking for support, because I have made that mistake before, and it just means that you're wasting time. You're going to spend the first few months of deployment struggling and feeling like, you're barely keeping your head above water because you're trying to find your support while you're drowning. And that's hard. So the more that you can be proactive and start that process before deployment, whether that's just looking into local resources, is there a local organization that would help with childcare or would be able to provide something that you're going to need during the deployment? Is there a program on base that happens once a month that you need to get on your calendar and make sure that happens? Just start looking on your own. What are the resources that I can lean on during this deployment? And of course, like we said, connecting with actual people, getting actual phone numbers, so important to do. And I think another big question is where people should live during deployment. And I have a whole section in my deployment guide about this. I have a blog article about it too. But really, the answer is going to be different for everyone. So during his earlier deployments when we were not married, I did stay with my family. It was the reason we didn't get married, is because he kept deploying so much. And I had a job and I had a support system and local family. So I stayed where I was and did not marry him and move out to his base. But once we were married and had established a house and had multiple kids, I didn't want to move in with my parents during deployment. That felt like that would just be too disruptive to all of us. So you really have to make that decision based on your current life situation, not based on what worked for your friend or even what your spouse is saying they recommend. You really need to go where you're going to have support and where you're going to have peace of mind. I see a lot of people having unrealistic expectations for their family members, saying, oh yeah, I'm just going to move home with the in-laws, or I'm going to move home with my parents and it'll be totally fine. Me and the baby will be in my childhood bedroom for 9 months. What could go wrong? And a few months into it, they find that they are just not getting any mental break. They don't have any personal space. There have been no boundaries set. So being very realistic about who you're leaning on for support, what the expectations are, and how that's going to work for both of you, I think is so important. And finally, I try and educate people about the cycle of deployment, because deployment does not begin on the day that they leave. It took me a long time to figure that out, but it begins months ahead of time during those workups, during those trainings. They're called different things for different units, but the emotional cycle of deployment begins months ahead of time. And that's why couples constantly see this stress and increase of arguing and just this disconnect emotionally before deployment. And they say, well, why are we fighting so much? He hasn't even left yet. This is going to be horrible once he's actually gone. And it turns out that for me, at least, and for many other spouses have confirmed, that's the most stressful time for them, is that time before deployment. And then once deployment begins, things become a little bit more stable. You develop some type of routine. It's probably different from your regular routines, but you can kind of maintain a status quo for a while during the deployment. But that pre-deployment and that end of deployment stressful cycle catches a lot of people by surprise. It caught me by surprise, even preparing for our 7th deployment. I was laughing with a friend. I'm like, I wrote a blog post about this and I had to go back and read it because apparently it's happening all over again and I did not expect it. So I think the more we know about what to expect from those cycles and those time periods of deployment, it can kind of help us understand what's normal, what should I anticipate, and how can I help my service member and I to move through this situation.
Absolutely. So we've talked about how you can cope through the deployment and get yourself ready. But what about our kids? How do we make sure we're supporting our kids during these deployments? What do you suggest?
That's probably a whole hour
I
long.
know. Just give me your abbreviated.
I mean, it really depends on the kids' ages. So I've had every age from newborn. My oldest is currently 13. So I can only speak authoritatively on those, little ones up to the school years. They're going to ask different questions and have different needs at those ages. So I do have, there's a whole post on my blog about how to speak to children of different ages about deployment. Of course, the way you're going to explain daddy's leaving to a toddler is different from the language you're going to be using for a 12-year-old who has a very real grasp of the world and the possibility of death and all of those things. But a lot of it, I guess, summarizes down to kids thrive on structure and routine. And so if you can establish some of those routines even before the service member leaves so that things feel somewhat consistent even after deployment has started, that will be a huge help for you. For me, that meant that I had to learn to handle the bedtime routine by myself, even when my service member was here, which was really hard and frustrating and stressful. But I realized if I was going to be doing it on my own for 7 months, then I had to work out the kinks before he left so that I felt confident doing it by myself rather than waiting until day 1 to figure out which kid am I holding in which arm and how are we going to do it.
At that point, you're stressed and you're sad and your service member has left and then you're trying to do something brand new and it involves kids who are stressed and sad and emotional, and it just can turn into a really stressful situation if you haven't prepared ahead of time.
Yeah. So absolutely the
older
routine.
Kids, absolutely. I actually have an adult child. My son turned 18 this year, and a 17-year-old and an almost 13-year-old. And it is such a different scenario than when they're younger because, like, my oldest, he reads the news. He knows more about what's going on in the world than I do oftentimes. And so he will get a lot more stressed out when he hears that his dad is going somewhere that could potentially be dangerous. Whereas I would maybe not even realize it's a super dangerous place. My son will be like, well, what about this? And what about this? And it does become a more adult conversation as your kids are grown. Such a different scenario from when they're 5 or 6 years old and you're just giving them like the bare bones of what's happening and not too much to overwhelm them, to when your kids are adults or, young adults and they know what's happening in the world. I mean, my 12-year-old watches CNN 10 every day and comes home and tells me what's happening in the news. I don't have to watch the news because my kids keep me informed. So it is just such a different scenario between the ages. And there's really, I don't think necessarily a right way. There's a right way for your family. And what works for your family is not going to be the same as what works for my family or someone else's. So you take the tools that you give us and then you use what works and you tweak it to how it works for your family. And hopefully it goes great. And if not, then you do something different. And I think that's where the whole Semper Gumby comes in as far as the Marine Corps. Like, just be flexible and know that whatever you do, if it doesn't work, it's okay. And you can try something new tomorrow. And, your kids are very adaptable and very flexible and will learn through these deployments and, be better people if you encourage them to, be resilient through these deployments.
No. I'm a big fan of trying different things. Like you said, choosing what works for your family. Try not to compare to another parent or another, the way that you grew up or the way that your spouse grew up. Like, your children are going to have a different lifestyle, and that's okay. I'm also a big fan of streamlining your household, which the younger they are, the more important that is, because you're the only one that's an adult who's able to handle the chores. But even as they get older, you can start handing off some of those chores and training the kids in routines. My kids have been doing their own laundry for years because they gather up their own stuff in their room and they throw their own stuff. We don't sort anymore. Just throw one kid's clothes into the wash and they know how to put it into the dryer. And just taking that simple thing off of my plate and making it their responsibility, the more that you can do that at an age appropriate level, it's going to be so helpful. So we always start thinking of, before the deployment, what's our structure going to be for serving dinner? Who's making it? Who's setting the table? Are we just going to skip to paper plates? Because that's okay sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, whatever is going to work for you and for your family, you find your own answers and you don't worry about other people's judgment and, keeping up with the Joneses or anything like that.
Yeah. I feel like comparison is just a killer. If if you see someone else and you're like, oh, their deployment's going so great, but we don't see the inside of people's homes. We don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And comparing yourself or your kids or your family to someone else's is just going to drag you down. And so definitely don't do that. So you have created so much content. You've got books, blogs, so much great stuff about deployments. Can you tell us just really quickly where we can find some of that information? And also drop it in the chat as well so that people can look it up.
For sure. My blog is seasonspouse.com. So I do have years worth of deployment articles on there and a lot about going through deployment with kids and free resources and military discounts. I love talking about things like that because that's what's really helped me get through the past few years with little ones. I also run a free deployment support group on Facebook. So you are all invited. It has over 7,000 members right now, and they are all at some stage of either preparing for deployment, going through it with different units, different branches and groups, and people stay around even after their homecoming day to work through that reintegration time and to talk about how do we adjust and prepare for the next deployment. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. It's a very positive and supportive group. We do carefully curate the comments and the feedback from our members. So it is not the type of group where people are attacking each other.
Awesome. Love it.
People have found really great community and support through deployment that way. And then I mentioned the Ultimate Deployment Guide. I published that on Amazon a few years ago. It's also available as a download from my site. It's 28 pages, I think, of checklists and questions to ask and things to do to just get you prepared and answer the most common deployment questions I was seeing. And finally, I created a deployment masterclass, which is everything that I felt I wish people had told me before deployment, things I had learned the hard way. I interviewed a dozen different seasoned spouses who'd been through multiple deployments on particular topics that seemed to be the most common recurring deployment challenges. And we got all of their tips and details in videos that you can watch at any point. It also includes the Ultimate Deployment Guide as your textbook, and you get membership in the Facebook group as well. So it's kind of a complete community support during your deployment. And that's available on my Seasoned Spouse blog.
Awesome. I love that so much. So when you join your Facebook group, do you allow people to say, like, I live at Camp Pendleton and I would like to find some connections there? Is that something you guys are able to do on there? Because that would be valuable to me, even now as a seasoned spouse, we moved last summer and I was telling my husband, like, this has been the hardest move for me to make connections because my kids are older and I'm not necessarily at the playground or at the school or any of those things. And that's where I had historically made friends. And so I'm having to intentionally go out and find a way to make friends. But what a cool resource to be able to go in there and find people who are going through the exact same phase of life of deployments, and then find people who also live locally would be just an added bonus.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about your book. I'm really excited about this book called Open When, Letters of Encouragement from Military Spouses. There it is. And can you just tell us a little bit about this book and what went into it and the inspiration to create this book?
Yeah, I started writing it in Camp Pendleton, actually, not far from where you're living right now. And it was, I think, during his 6th deployment that I had started my blog. I had started sharing resources that people were telling me were helpful. And I started seeing a lot of people asking, is it normal to feel this? Is it okay if I am angry at the military today? Is it okay if I am jealous of my service member? Even though I know he's not cheating, I can't help wondering and doubting and feeling all this anxiety. And I realized that we need to talk about a lot of things in our community, and we need to normalize a lot of emotions. So I'm sure a lot of spouses have heard of the tradition of writing open when letters to the service member and putting them in a care package or putting them in their bags before they leave. And that way they have something to open when it's a particular holiday or birthday or anniversary, even if they can't communicate with you. I thought, who's writing letters to the spouses? Who's providing the encouragement that we need on a bad day, or when you've missed a phone call during deployment, or when you're really struggling with your kids, or all of these little tiny challenges in military life that it doesn't seem earth shattering. Missing a phone call is not the end of the world, but it can definitely ruin your day. And unless you have someone telling you, I've been there, I understand that, it's okay to be a little bit sad, and here's what you can do to hopefully avoid that happening in the future. Each letter in this book is a message of inspiration and encouragement that you can open when you're facing a particular challenge in military life. And there's a whole section on deployment, also talks about PCS moves, also talks about the whole ups and downs of the military journey. But my hope is that it gives that little inspiration that you need to face the challenge that you're in right now, to meet you where you are in that moment, and to help you take the next step forward, to kind of see the light and realize that it's okay, I can do this. Others have gone before me and done it too. So I'm going to do this.
I'm so excited to read it. Even though we're not in a deployment cycle right now, I just love that it's more than deployments. It's just military life in general. So, do you have a favorite chapter? Is there a chapter in there that you read over and over again that you just love?
I have gone back to reread my own book. Because when you're writing it, I started writing it years ago, and the entire process of editing a book and publishing it is very drawn out. So even though I've been over it, I've gone over every page so many times. Last year, for example, when there was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the military community, I think on every level was just suffering emotionally. There was a lot of doubt, there was anger, frustration. I mean, there was a whole range of emotions, and the book was already published. So of course I knew I had not written a letter about open when you're freaking out about Afghanistan. That's not in there, but I was like, there's got to be something. I need something that will get me through today and like help me keep my chin up and move forward. And I found open when the military throws you curveballs, and also open when you feel out of control. And that really, even though they were written in different situations and kind of using broad strokes to talk about other military life moments, the message of those letters was so helpful in that particular situation. So I have gone back at different times when I've been faced with different things, said, what advice did I give myself that I can take from this book? And I have enjoyed that. I will say the deployment section was the easiest for me to write. It's so close to my heart. I was going through his 6th and his 7th deployments while I was working on the book. So it was very much in the moment. I was talking to so many spouses who were dealing with deployment challenges. So I was very well aware of what that feels like and what you need in those moments. But I can also say that my editor's favorite letter was from the PCS section. And she really liked the heartfelt emotions of the letter that's called Open When You Leave a Home You Love. And I wrote that one when my parents sold the childhood home where I had grown up. But it's also just about, I reflected on leaving our house in Spain where we knew that we'd probably never return to that house again. I don't know that I'll ever be able to travel to Spain again. And all the homes that we've left during military life, the first home that we bought as a married couple, all the homes that we've lived in on base and off base. And the message of that letter is that every new house becomes your home. And there are ways that you can pack up your memories and take the essence of a home with you and unpack that into whatever place you move into next. So that letter I have done a live reading of. There's actually a video on my publisher's website where you can watch the full length letter of Open When You Leave a Home You Love.
It's in the chat as well. So if you want to watch Lizann read the live, it's just been dropped in the chat. So you can definitely do that. I am so excited to read this book. And what do you want military spouses to get out of your book? What are some things you hope that they get when they read this?
Definitely encouragement. We made sure that we put letters of encouragement in the title because it is all about that positive message of encouragement, inspiration, hope. And it really covers your full military journey. The beginning section is for new to military life, and the final section is for seasoned spouses. So my hope is that this is a book that you can keep on your bookshelf no matter where you're living, how many times you've moved, and that you can continually turn to it for advice when you're faced with new and different situations and kind of validation that you're not going through this life alone. There are so many other military spouses who have been in similar situations or faced a similar challenge. You're not the only one. You don't have to figure it out by yourself. And you have this whole community here to support you and to inspire you through it.
Absolutely. Now you've given me 2 things that I can give to spouses as gifts. So I'm really excited. I love to do like a welcome to the neighborhood basket. And now I have 2 new ideas of things to stick in there for people. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I always love to support other military spouses. And I also think that it's probably going to be an amazing book. I'm really excited to read. My husband's leaving for a short trip soon, so I'll have plenty of time to read because my kids don't hang out with me anymore because they're teenagers. So I have all this reading time, so I'm definitely going to grab your book.
Thank you.
And if you are watching the live stream or if you're part of this, we're actually going to be giving this book away. We're super excited to be giving away a copy of Open When. And we'd like to invite our attendants to enter that giveaway using the link that we're going to drop in the comments right now, or if you're any of the posts that you see about the giveaway on SpouseLink.org's social pages, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. If you're friends with me, I will be sharing that on my page as well, so you can definitely, get signed up that way. Lizann might share it so that we can get some more her followers as well if they're interested in entering for this awesome book as a giveaway. It's going to be open until the 28th of this month, so make sure that you enter. Lizann, where can we buy this book? I want to go buy it today. Where can I buy it?
3 places. It is from a publisher, which is Military Family Books. It is available on Amazon for the same price. And you can also order an autographed copy that will come from my home to yours with your name and my name and a sweet little note to encourage you along the way. There's a landing page where you can request an autographed copy as well.
And those links will also be in the chat. So if you're watching this live, you'll be able to get if they're there already. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I learned so much from you, and I can't wait to read your book and keep reading your blog. Can you just tell us remind us again, where can we find your blog? Where can we find info about you before we sign off? Where can we find you?
Yeah, the blog is seasonspouse.com. I'm on most social media platforms as Seasoned Spouse, or on Instagram, it's The Seasoned Spouse. But I'm pretty active. I'm always happy to take messages and emails, and I am just so happy to connect with all of you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with SpouseLink today. And I look forward to sharing your resources with my deployment group to help them find another community to support them through deployment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone else who is here in the audience today. Join us again on April 26th. Sarah will be back and she'll be discussing how you save for the unexpected. So don't miss that live with Sarah Baumgartner coming up in a couple weeks. And thanks for letting me fill in for her this week. I had a great time chatting with you, Lizann. And I look forward to following you and stalking you on social media and all that stuff. So you're going to see me everywhere on your social media now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.